Hey, everybody. We are live. So, welcome to the end. We are at the end of our study on Revelation. We have reached the section on chapters 18 to 22. This is the final little bit. I was talking with one of my friends the other day. I was like, Methodists know two parts of Revelation. We know the letter to the churches in chapter 2, and then we know the end, 20, 21, 22. But we have covered the span of it and survived. And tonight I have Pastor Michael Roberts with me again. He's going to share a little bit on what we're talking about today. We're going to talk about how bad things get. They get really bad. And then how great things get. They get really great. So we'll just start out with that. Let me share my screen here real quick. And we'll talk about a couple of things. Remember that you can join us two different ways. You can be with us here on Facebook Live and watch it here, and you'll see the lecture portion of the evening. Although tonight it might be a little bit more interactive because there's two of us on here. And or the other thing to do is to come in on the webinar. So go to zoom.us and then put in this webinar ID 936-7995-7360. Particularly if you have any questions or comments that you want to make, that you want to address to myself or to Michael, either one, then join us on the webinar. And if you want to stay on Facebook right now, but join us in a bit, I'll put this information back up at that point as well. Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about those first couple of chapters, 18 and 19, and talk about how one of the things that has to happen in an apocalypse when we're talking about that model and that frame is that apocalypses have to get really bad. It's got to get to the point where there's that definitive battle, and to the point where you just don't want to take any. You just almost can't take anymore. So I pulled a few of these memes from the kind of mid days of the apocalypse that we've gone through, but they certainly could represent any number of things, right? We started out with Australia on fire, and then Kobe dying, then COVID-19, then the economy takes, and we find out about UFOs, and then we were at this point. This was the where this meme came out, giant murder hornets, and then they just do a series of different things that they guess. But down here at March 2021 is the rapture, so we're just a couple weeks away from that. And then this idea of just all these different beasts coming out to play in the midst of an apocalypse. And then this report that Chernobyl was on fire and was sending out toxic waste and radiation up into the air. And someone said, I just don't have radioactive forest fires at Chernobyl on my bingo card, right? We have seen so much in the course of this apocalypse and have kind of wondered about it. It's been a rather intense experience, and that really speaks to this reality of what we have in apocalypses. So there has to be a final battle. Remember that this is an apocalypse is a cosmic battle of good and evil, and even when it's written on a more personal side, there's a tipping point where things just seem like they're as absolutely bad as you can get, and something absolutely has to give on that, right? And so if it's a personal apocalypse, if it's a local apocalypse, if it's a national apocalypse, a worldwide apocalypse, there's got to be that point where we have this definitive battle, right? So this is the fall of Babylon in the book of Revelation. And remember that we're taking an idealist perspective to interpreting Revelation. So it represents kind of any of these moments of great struggle and stress. So Babylon, in that kind of interpretation, represents whatever significant power is opposing God. Now, in the first century, this would have been Rome, right? That would have been the understanding of who Babylon is. In a current understanding, it kind of depends on the situation. Who seems to be the seat of power? Some would say Washington, D.C. in this time, and again, depending on whether you're dealing with a personal apocalypse or a worldwide apocalypse, national apocalypse, that sort of thing, that that will shift who Babylon is. But it's whoever kind of has power and is in opposition to the will of God, in the sense of just things aren't happening the way God would want them to happen. Another important thing to note about the final apocalypse is that it's a dismantling of all the systems which prove to be weak. So again, on a big scale apocalypse, that would be politics, economics, defense, entertainment. And those are represented in here, like by the merchants, by the sailors, by the kings, and even by the ones who create, the artists, the craftsmen, who are in here. So those kind of big scale systems are represented, and they're going to be dismantled, and something else will be put into their place. But even on a personal apocalypse, sometimes what you're going through is a change, such a deep change to your own culture. So for instance, if your personal apocalypse is a tragic death, for instance, like you've lost someone tragically, that is going to significantly change the culture of your life, because, if it was a spouse, then you have to go through the questions of, if they were paying all the bills, and now I got to pay all the bills. I woke up every morning and looked forward to coffee with them, and that's not going to happen. And so it's a recognition that those systems, on a smaller scale, but very important to you and how you organize your life, right, have to be renovated. And so that's the reckoning that happens in an apocalypse. And I think it's just a recognition of reality, that this is what happens when there is a time of great stress and trial. Things change. they change. And there are moments that invite change into that as well. And there are certainly moments that invite God to step into. And that's, we have this section in here where Babylon is recognized as too proud, right? As it sees itself as the center of everything, and that gets all shuffled around. And that's in some ways God's business, right? To keep us from getting too reliant on our own systems and our own understandings. And again, not that God brings these things on us, but God will step in and replace them when they've gotten too big for their britches, so to speak, in the sense of they will eventually fall. And when they fall, God's there to step into the vacuum. Another important thing about these final kind of definitive battles is they do feel like they're watched by the world. They do feel significant enough that people are paying attention, right? And again, that can happen with personal apocalypses when you go to sit with a friend who's in deep grief, something along those lines. But it also is certainly in something that we're experiencing right now. The news has covered it. It's on display. There's a sort of large scale voyeuristic, everyone can see it, reality before us, and it strikes horror in us to some extent, right? It makes us stop and wonder if the same thing would happen to us, or if we're all in it together. We kind of collectively gasp in that space. There's also a recognition there may be some false starts on the completion of it. So there's a couple of battles that happen here before Satan, in this particular case, is cast out definitively. And so that it may seem like this is as bad as it can get, and then you catch your breath and there's one more gasp. And that's hard. It's really, really hard. On a personal level, on a national level, those are hard. And I think about this time that we've been in, and how many times we said, okay, we're almost through this. And then here comes something else, right? So it's a little bit, I think we need to take seriously that hopelessness can creep into this space just because of how big it feels and how hard it feels. And while waiting for things to rectify and to get better, it can get rough, and it can be a multi-stage space. So, but within that, just keep holding, keep being true, keep finding the hope in it as well. Just keep on keeping on, so to speak. I just a couple more memes that sort of recognize that reality. This was the leaking of the 2020 calendar, right? What could possibly go wrong? And then the piling on of things in this. I can't believe it's riot season already. I still have my COVID decorations up. And then this one I just thought was a fantastic representation of that kind of, this is it. We can't take any more, right? Thank you for your interest in wiping out half of humanity. This is in response to scientists saying apocalyptic bird flu could wipe out half of humanity. Thank you for your interest in wiping out half of humanity. We're experiencing a high volume of apocalypse right now. Your apocalypse is very important to us. The next available group of self-identified experts with no experience in the field will be with you shortly. It feels so much sometimes, and that's just got to be recognized. And like I said, this is kind of the piling on of it. This period is sometimes referred to as post-apocalypse. The battles that we talked about beforehand, or even really the kicking off of everything, sometimes are referred to as the apocalypse. And this moving into this definitive battle and dealing with all these millennial stages are sometimes understood as the post-apocalypse. If you want an example of a post-apocalypse that's still awful, that post-apocalypse is not a great time. The Hunger Games is a good example. There's something that has happened that was catastrophic, that caused all these districts to go into poverty, to struggle, and the war or whatever it was that put them into this space. And so that time that they're living through these Hunger Games is that post-apocalypse. So it's kind of weird because, we know apocalypse is the word for revelation. So it's weird to talk about the post-revelation in Revelation, but that is just one of the places where our terms get a little mixed up. But this time where there's all these eras of hardship are sometimes referred to as the post-apocalypse. So it's going to be hard, but ultimately, we're going to get to something better. Ultimately, that's where we're headed. We are going to get out of the darkness, and that's what we've got here with these two. These couple of memes, right? Do you remember that? Oh, y'all have had a moment the other day at the store. I walked into the grocery store and there were more Clorox wipes than I had seen in months. I mean, they were on the end caps of rows. They were in the rows of the cleaning areas, and they were out in the center that you could buy. And I just stood and stared at them like, oh, it's a miracle. Like, it's so good to see Clorox wipes back. So that's this toilet paper is returning to its natural habitat, and the earth is healing. Cows are returning to the sea, which is just absurd, right? But that kind of points to that. It is going to be phenomenally powerful whenever we get past that apocalypse. So that's kind of leads us into where Michael's going to take over. Michael, you want to talk to us about the happy ending of Revelation?
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And I do love this way of interpreting this important book in the Bible, where you're not just looking at it in a kind of literal sense or in a historical sense, but through this idealistic sense, or even you could call it a theological sense. It really is disrespectful to every other generation, and especially these first hearers of this word, to think that it only has relevance for one particular time in history. It certainly has relevance for all of us. So this idea of looking at this through the lens of a personal apocalypse is so helpful, and it brings to light so many wonderful and beautiful things in this book. So I really do love that end, that way. And as the word purpose, we talk about the end of things as being the purpose of things. So Revelation points to the end or the purpose of all things, and does symbolically summarize the end of the purpose of all things with this image of heaven and talking about what heaven is. Michelle, as you were talking, I thought about the ending of a movie. I don't even remember what movie, and I may not get the quote exactly right, but the movie ends with this line, something like, at the end, everything will be well. So if everything is not well, then it's not the end. So we can trust that in God's grace, at the end, be it our personal, at a personal end, at the end of a personal apocalypse that we might be going through right now, at the end of our personal lives here on this earth, at the end of creation, what we can know deep in our hearts is that everything will be well. So it does get better. It does get good in the end. So let's think about heaven for just a moment. In Revelation, and we've seen this already, Revelation is pictured as a sanctuary. That's the image that is used. That's the symbol that is used. Heaven is imaged as a place of worship. And the focus is on all that glorifies God. So I want to think for just a moment about this word glory for a moment, and also give a preview of our Lenten study, because glory is one of the words that we're going to use in our Lenten study starting this week. Glory is often pictured as light. Glory is what illuminates God. To glorify is to illuminate what is worthy of praise. So I want to think for just a moment about what glorifies God. And if you wanted to in the chat, you could name those and just and say some of those things that glorify God. If you don't do that, as I'm talking, think about what glorifies God. What brings glory into the world? Love brings glory into the world. Forgiveness brings glory into the world. We could name so many other things. Caring for others, especially those who are marginalized, who are oppressed in some way. That glorifies God. So this word glory is used to describe heaven and to describe our relationship with God. It's worth noting, and Michelle, I know, points this out in the devotions, or we point this out in the devotion, but I think she pointed it out in a previous lesson here too, that God gives glory to us, and we are able to give glory back to God. So worship is this mutual relationship where we bring to light the values and the ways of the divine. That's what worship is meant to be. Every time we worship, that's what it's meant to be, this back and forth relational dynamic of revealing, revelation, of revealing all of those things that truly do glorify God. So back in chapter 5, verse 12, worthy is the Lamb who was slaughtered to receive power, wisdom, honor, glory, and blessings. We hear the angels of heaven singing to the one on the throne and to the Lamb to be blessed and honored, glorified forever and ever. That is a description of heaven. Heaven is a place where we will praise God in this way. But you may not want to think about it as heaven is just this eternal act of kind of being in the sanctuary and going through the liturgy, kind of like the way we do. It is a life of living in the values and the ways that bring glory into the world. So heaven is described symbolically as a sanctuary, as a place of worship. Singing is another dimension of this. Throughout Revelation, we hear about people are singing. Well, I think about singing symbolically. It's a real act. But what's happening when we sing? When we sing together, we're taking our individual voices and creating harmony, creating something, something beautiful, so that we're all, something we're all doing together. So it's both real, but it's also symbolic. And this is why singing glorifies God. So we read in Revelation over and over again where the angels of heaven are singing, and we are invited to join in that song. If you participated in worship this morning, I had a couple of moments where I experienced this, even online, but in the midst of song. I mean, when the praise band was singing, calling us to listen to God, I had that moment where I was truly worshiping, and worshiping in the sense of this relational dynamic between me and God, where love and forgiveness and joy was illuminated, was revealed in that moment. When the bells were playing, it wasn't singing, but it was certainly music. I have two grandchildren in my home, and I had spent the previous 20 minutes saying things like, sit down, be quiet, listen, over and over and over again.
You mean during my sermon?
Yes. Yeah. I'm sorry, Michelle. Yes. Even.
It's okay. Throw me under the bus. It's all right.
I'm sorry. Even during your sermon. But then the bells started playing, and they were quiet. They noticed their uncle playing bells. They certainly noticed that. But there was something about that moment where they entered into the presence of the divine. They experienced a glimpse of heaven. They knew deep in their heart, in a way that, in a language that, we could only talk about in symbolic ways. They knew in that moment that God was with them somehow, that they were not alone, that whatever their end might be, it was going to be good. All of that is wrapped up in those moments when we do connect. So heaven is pictured as worship in Revelation. Next, I want us to ask the question, or reflect on the question, who will be there? Who will be there? We read in chapter 7, beginning with verse 9, there will be a great multitude that no one can count, from every nation and all tribes and people and languages, standing before the throne and the Lamb robed in white, and crying out, singing and saying, salvation belongs to our God, who is seated on the throne, and to the Lamb. Who will be there? A great multitude, which no one can count. And I want us just to reflect on that for just a moment. How high can we count? In the Bible, 1,000, the number 1,000 is often used as kind of a number to illustrate a lot. I mean, illustrate more than we can count, more than we could ever even imagine. Today, we can count way beyond 1,000.
Yeah.
There are estimates, and these are just estimates of what we can actually kind of sense and see, estimates of 800 billion galaxies, not just stars, galaxies. And that's just what kind of the tip of the iceberg of what we can even kind of begin to count. And we know that. It is almost just arrogant for us as human beings to think that our little worlds, our little kingdoms, so to speak, our way of thinking and knowing is the end of knowledge, is that, that somehow summarizes up life and creation and existence. All of creation points to the reality that there is so much more. The perishable is able to take on the imperishable. The mortal is able to take on immortality. Death is able to become life. We experience it in small ways over and over and over again. And we know in our hearts that God has that in store for us. We're also going to have to get used to being there with a lot of other people.
Right?
Yeah, a lot. Yeah, a lot of others. So here's another thing that heaven is. There is no room in heaven for hatred, prejudice, for self-righteousness. There's just no room for that at all. Take a moment to think about what will not be there. Maybe that's a fun way to think about this. What will not be in heaven? What are you looking forward to that will not be there? Bullying, demeaning of other people.
Abuse and anger.
Abuse, yeah, anger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have sometimes kicked around the we get asked questions about heaven all the time as pastors. It's something that people want to know. What happens to us after we die? My answer is always, I don't know. But I trust God, so we'll get there, right? Whatever it is. But I have, everybody kind of muses. And in some ways, the end of Revelation is amusing on that, right? And I thought, it should be just like God. And it comes from this image in Revelation where all of the people are there, right? It would be just like God for the person that meets us as we come into heaven, wherever that is, would be the person that we dislike the most on earth. And that would be the kind of test, right? Can he come in if this person's at the door? Because that's really the vision of heaven, right? It's a reconciliation of all things and all creation. And so and I think God would give us the capacity to do that, right? To experience that forgiveness and that love in that space. It seems to me so like God to invite us in that way, right? And also I think it's important to remember that when we talk about the new heaven and the new earth in Revelation, there's not this sense that it's this away place. There's this sense that this creation is renewed. We return to Genesis over and over and over in Revelation, and we certainly do at the very end when we have this garden image, right? And the tree of life is in its fullness, and we are in our fullness. It's been a full reconciliation and renovation of what we already have. And that for me also calls me to take care of here and now, because here and now is going to be the then too, just in a kind of shiny and new way, right?
Yeah. There's this it's kind of a scary image about this book of life. And if your name's not written in the book of life, then you're going to be excluded from this somehow. Well, what will be excluded is all those things that we named already. What will be excluded are things that do not glorify God. Mm-hmm. And we will all be cleansed of those things in some way, so that we can live in heaven, in the beloved community of God.
Yeah.
The book of life, though, Christ is the book of life. The book of life is not necessarily this static thing. Christ is the book of life, the Logos, the Word of God. And that word is forgiveness. That word is grace. That word is the power to cleanse all that would keep us from communion with God. Yeah. So it really is good news. So at the end, we read, it may be one of my the most positive, beautiful lines in this all of Scripture. This notion of the Spirit says, "Come, let everyone who is thirsty come. Let everyone who wishes to taste, to take the water of life as a gift, come." It's a beautiful invitation. I think that's in chapter 22, right?
Yeah, and that's the invitation that we're all invited into as people of faith. So we have that taste of heaven now in claiming Christ, in naming that, yes, we are thirsty for the living water. We do come to Christ for that and for that fulfillment. And that kind of leads us to wrapping one little wrapping up point on this, which is to say that as the people of faith, we do have a different perspective through an apocalypse. And I love these memes that in particular we're talking about how people are managing the current apocalypse that we're in, right? So there's the world right now, which is the Titanic sinking, and then there are those that are creating memes and finding the joy and the humor and the peace in the midst of it. And then same sort of thing with society collapsing all around us, me looking at funny internet pictures. It's not that we won't experience loss. It's not that we won't go through the struggle and the pain. We absolutely will. Faith does not keep us bulletproof from that. It's just that at our core, because we have already invited the living water in, because we already have access to this stream that will quench our thirst, when there are those times of scarcity, we have what we need to sustain us. We have Christ to walk alongside us. We have that hope and that assurance in the life that is to come. And that assurance carries us through the life that is now, whatever that life ends up looking like. It is our reality. It is what sustains us. So that's why I love the book of Revelation. It is such a powerful and real book. Yes, it's difficult to struggle through. Yes, it has its symbolism that weighs us down. Yes, there are any number of people that are interpreting it in ways that I think are harmful in a lot of cases and careless in some others, or useful in a time, in a season, but we're past that season. But for me, the book of Revelation always represents that we do go through hard times. There are things that go terribly awry. And yet, even within those, God is present. God is Lord. God has got this, and God has got us. And so that is what I love about the book of Revelation. So don't run from it, y'all. It's a beautiful space. It's a beautiful space. Michael and I will continue this conversation in the question and answer session. So if you would like to join us for that, just go to zoom.us and put in this webinar ID 936-7995-7360. This is the last one. We are not meeting next week. We're finishing this up. Lent starts next week. As Michael mentioned, we have a Lenten emphasis that we're kicking off on to celebrate what is beautiful in the midst of all of this. We are going to be eating chocolate through Lent. And so we invite you to come alongside us for that as well. Just check out our website, conwayfumc.org, for resources that will be coming out this week. But if you want to continue for about 20 more minutes, the conversation about Revelation, we do invite you to join us here in the question and answer. For those of you that are not going to join us there, that this is the last week, thank you so much for having been with us. We hope that this has been helpful. Feel free to share it. There is a playlist this will be edited and added to, and so there's this whole apocalypse memed playlist on our YouTube channel, Conway FUMC YouTube channel. So if you want to share this with someone else, if you think it would be helpful for them, if you want to use it for a study, feel free. You are welcome to it. Michael, thank you for being with us tonight and for helping me kick it off at the beginning. I'm sure we'll come up with more of these but kind of Bible approaches and studies that we'll have in the future. But we're grateful for those of you that have been here during this time, and we look forward to those of you that are in the question and answer. We'll be there shortly. Those of you that are have joined us on Facebook, blessings. for your day.